All right, folks, Roland Martin here. Today is a Friday, January 11th, 2019. And coming up on Roland Martin Unfiltered, day 2 of white supremacist Congressman Steve King, Republican from Iowa. More Republicans are putting him on blast. One major conservative outlet even calling for him to be removed from Congress. We're going to hear from him. He took to the floor today of the House to explain his thoughts and perspective from that New York Times article. Yeah, I've got it. And yes, I shall be deconstructing it again. Also joining us will be Ohio Congressman Tim Ryan, Democrat, who is looking at the information on how to censure Congressman Steve King. Oh, I can't wait to have this conversation. And what the hell is wrong with major media in America? 5 times more coverage of a freshman congresswoman from Detroit cussing than coverage of a white supremacist congressman. Some explaining to do. All that's going to be up next on Roland Martin Unfiltered. Also, the shutdown goes on, no end in sight. We'll look at what's happening to people who are living in public housing as their rent and subsidies are not being paid. The second African-American found dead in the home of Democratic donor Ed Buck in Los Angeles has been identified. Cleo Monago is here to talk about the real issue in terms of what's going on here of white men targeting black gay men in Los Angeles. You don't want to miss that conversation. Also, the Political Action Committee, Democracy for America, has a new leader. She's African-American, and she's also the first female, first black and first female. You don't want to miss that conversation. And also, Dr. Carr is here to talk about the story of a courageous black postmaster who was lynched in South Carolina in the 19th century and will have a post office named after him on the 21st century. Also, our series continues on HBCU professors. We'll talk to a professor at Virginia State University who is really getting people focused on urban farming. Folks, it is a packed show. There's only one like us. It's time to bring the funk on Roland Martin Unfiltered. Let's go.
He's got it. Whatever the miss, he's on it. Whatever it is, he's got the scoop, the fact, the find. And when it breaks, he's right on time. And it's rolling. Best believe he's knowing. Putting it down from sports to news to politics. With entertainment just for kicks, he's rolling. It's on go, y'all. It's Roland Martin, rolling with Roland now. He's funk, he's fresh, he's real, the best, you know he's Roland Martin.
All right, folks, just because Iowa Republican Congressman Steve King tried to walk back his racist comments quoted in the New York Times doesn't mean we are going to stop talking about them. Now this is now day 2 of all the drama from the article that dropped yesterday in the New York Times. This is what Republican Steve King had to say. He said, quote, white nationalists, white supremacist, Western civilization, how did that language become offensive? Why did I sit in classes teaching me about the merits of our history and our civilization? Now, in addition to that particular comment, he also took a shot at Democrats by saying, as he looked across the aisle when everyone was sworn in, he pretty much questioned where is the place for white men in the Democratic Party? Because, see, he was a little troubled seeing so many black people and Latinos, and women as well. Now, Republicans have not been silent. Some of them, it has been like pulling teeth to get them to comment. Today, the Washington Post, South Carolina Republican Senator Tim Scott, the only African-American Republican in the United States Senate, he wrote this in an op-ed. And this is pretty much what he said in the article. He said, I will admit, I am unsure who is offended by the term Western civilization on its own, but anyone who needs white nationalists or white supremacists defined, described, and defended does lack some pretty common knowledge. 3 months ago, a white supremacist killed 2 black people in a parking lot in Kentucky. We're only 18 months from Charlottesville, where a white nationalist killed a white woman with a car and severely beat multiple black people. Almost 4 years ago, a white supremacist murdered 9 African Americans in a church in Charleston, South Carolina in 1998. White supremacists dragged James Byrd Jr. behind a pickup truck through Jasper, Texas, decapitating him in the process. These are just a sliver of the havoc that white nationalists and white supremacists have strewn across our nation for hundreds of years. 4 little girls killed in a bombing in Birmingham, Alabama, thousands lynched, and countless hearts and minds turned cruel and hateful. When people with opinions similar to King's open their mouths, they damage not only the Republican Party and the conservative brand, but also our whole nation as our nation as a whole. They want to be treated with fairness for some perceived slights, but refuse to return the favor to those on the other side. Some in our party wonder why Republicans are constantly accused of racism. It is because of our silence when things like this are said. That is why silence is no longer acceptable. It is tempting to write King or other extremists on race issues such as black nationalist Louis Farrakhan as lonely voices in the wilderness, but they are far more dangerous than that. They continue to rip at the fabric of our nation, a country built on hope, strength, and diversity. Now, Steve King was an avowed white nationalist and racist before the November election. No one in House leadership condemned him then. Now remember, he got reelected by the very small margin of 3%. If the Republican leadership had pulled their support before the election, he might not have won again. So his place in the House of Representatives is on them. And now that he is safely seated, they have condemned his language. I guess that's a start. Now here's Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy of California. Quote, "Everything about white supremacy and white nationalism goes against who we are as a nation. Steve's language is reckless, wrong, and has no place in our society. The Declaration of Independence states that all men are created equal. That is a fact. It is self-evident." Really? I don't really think so, but that's fine. Minority Whip Steve Scalise of Louisiana, remember, he's the same one who has his own issues with talking in front of white nationalists. I guess we forgot about that, huh? I think it was important that he rejected that kind of evil because that's what it is. It is evil ideology. I remember GOP conference chair Liz Cheney of Wyoming said these comments are abhorrent and racist and should have no place in our national discourse. Now, the National Review, a conservative weekly founded by the father of modern conservatism, William F. Buckley Jr. in the 50s. Now, they've been fine with Steve King all these years and his racist attitudes, but this is what they printed this week. There's currently a push to censure King in the House. We aren't a fan of this approach because the precedent it creates of the House passing judgment on the speech of its members. It'd be better if Republicans policed their own and the NRCC made it clear that it won't back King in a primary or the general election in 2020. King may be a clumsy, dangerous, bigoted, or some mix of the three. Whatever he is, he doesn't deserve the support of conservatives. Really. Now, the House of Representatives, they have 2 ways it can punish members for bad behavior. One is expulsion, that has been used 5 times in American history. Then there is censure, which has been used more than 20 times. The last member who was censured, Congressman Charlie Rangel of New York, due to issue of finances. Now, Democrat Representative Tim Ryan of Ohio is working on the censure for Steve King, and he joins us right now via phone. Congressman, how you doing?
Hey, Roland.
So what's interesting here is that you have Republicans who all of a sudden just are grossly offended by Steve King. But this is a guy who last year endorsed a white nationalist in Canada, who endorsed white nationalists, white supremacists in Europe, who has made comments that have been degrading to Latinos, to women, to black folks, and others. So they can't act brand new on the bigotry of Steve King.
No, this has been going on for a long time, and I think it's got progressively worse in the last few years. Like most things in the country, I think the president has given a lot of cover for people like Steve King to make these comments. And, you know, that's why talking about censuring him, I think it's important for us to say, look, this is not acceptable behavior. As you stated in the opening, there have been multiple deaths and killings in the last few years, but, you know, going back to the beginning of our country's history. So this is a black mark that we need to make sure that it's not indicative. I don't want people around the world to think it's okay. He gave this interview, on foreign territory, and the president, we know what he does too. So I think we have to take a stand on this and say this this is not acceptable behavior.
Now, of course, Steve King is 69 years old. He has been in Congress. I believe this is his 9th term. And what's interesting here is that even in the same article, he was critical even of, frankly, the Democratic Party, making a comment saying that like what's going on, essentially what's going on with people like you, the few number of white men, saying the Democratic Party is not a place for white men, when he looked across the aisle to see all those people of color who were elected to Congress.
Well, I mean, this is the worldview you have. I mean, there's those of us that think that our diversity is our greatest strength. It enriches us socially, culturally, economically, and that it's one of the real comparative advantages we have in the United States is our diversity. And then you have the Steve King, Donald Trump worldview that wants to go back hundreds of years and build walls and go back to days when it was only white people that were in charge. And I think that comment to me, just showed the worldview. It ripped the curtain back, and now everyone can see that what they want to do. I mean, as I said earlier, before all this stuff was kind of veiled, no one would come out and say it. We knew it was kind of happening, but no one would come out and say it. Now he comes out and he says it right in a public interview.
And has no issue with it. Now, Congresswoman Ryan, one of your colleagues, Pramelia Jayapal of Washington State, was talking about the wall last night with Chris Hayes on MSNBC. And she talked about really what the motive is behind this. And it actually ties in directly with Steve King. And so I want to play that, and then we'll talk about it.
Because his ultimate goal is, as you said, to make America pure in the sense of not having immigrants, not having folks of color here, and shutting down every form of legal immigration, all to throw a bone to those people.
Now, of course, in that same article, she was talking about, of course, Donald Trump and the wall, yet in the same article, Donald Trump was talking about how much money he raised for Steve King when he visited Iowa in 2014. And this is what Steve King said. Yes, Mr. President, but I market tested your immigration policy for 14 years, and that ought to be worth something. So in essence, Steve King, what she just said aligns with what Steve King's view is. The reality is he doesn't want people of color in this country. He wants America to remain a white dominant nation.
There's no question about it. You look at his rhetoric, you look at how he handled Charlottesville, you look at the race baiting that he does day in and day out, from Maxine Waters to LeBron James to whoever he can pull up that's a person of color, and that's what he's done. And I think him and Steve King really are on the same page. It's a long way from saying we need border security, which I think we all believe in. We need to know who's in our country. That's important for us to do it. We need to keep heroin out of our country because of the opiate epidemic. That's very important. Those are issues that we all agree on. But we're for bringing people into the country that enrich our country, economically, socially, culturally, through a legal immigration system. And as you said, and as Congresswoman said, that's not what they want. That's not what they want. They want something completely different. They want to lock the doors and go back hundreds of years to, when we were a completely white country. We're all in this together, Roland. I mean, this is the thing. If we're going to move forward as a country, it's going to be white, black, brown, men, women, gay, straight, all of us together moving forward to make our country a better country for all people. Who all have issues, and we can right the wrongs, but we can only do it together. Darwin said it's not the strongest that survive, it's the ones who cooperate the best. And so we've got to come together to fix all these problems, whether it's the economy or criminal justice or health care or pensions. We can't solve these being divided. We've got to come together. And the president, whether it's this issue or any others, he intentionally tries to divide us. He goes out of his way to throw gasoline on some of these fires that are burning in the United States. And this is a hot issue that Steve King has kind of ripped the curtain back and showed everybody just how they think.
So the question is this here, you're studying it. Are you going to move forward to formally try to get the House to censure Congressman Steve King?
Yeah, we're having it drafted. I think we're going to move forward with it. And, you know, I'm trying to gauge some support. I would like it to be bipartisan. I'm reaching out to some Republican colleagues, too, because I think it needs to be bipartisan. We need to have the whole institution say this is wrong. You know, we may move forward even if we don't, but we're having it drafted right now. And, you know, we'll see where we are in a couple days if we can get some real support for this.
All right, Congressman Tim Ryan of Ohio, we certainly appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Roland. Take care. Have a good
Thank you
weekend.
very much. Now, of course, we've been focused on this issue. I told you yesterday when we went on the air, there was a tweet sent out by Media Matters saying that by 6 p.m., that, for the most part, all these networks completely ignored the comments by Steve King. Now it's even worse than you imagine. Joining us right now is Christina Lopez. She's Deputy Director of Extremism for Media Matters. And Christina, I got an email from Media Matters, which is why I said definitely got to book you guys on. And when Congresswoman Tlaib cursed at Donald Trump, your analysis shows that the coverage of what she had to say has got 5 times the amount of coverage as these mainstream media organizations covering racist Steve King. All right, guys, we're having some sound issues, and so let me know soon. And so, folks, I want to, again, go over that with you.
Here we go. Can you hear me now?
Christine, there we go. Now, go ahead.
There you go.
So, Christine,
Thank you.
yeah,
It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, again, what I said is that your analysis is that these mainstream media organizations had 5 times the amount of coverage of a freshman congresswoman cursing at Trump than they did yesterday covering this white supremacist Republican Steve King.
And this is the thing. When it comes to coverage, as you know, media makes a conscious decision, and therefore it prioritizes what is most important. And from what we've learned is that for media, for national media, a congresswoman cursing is far more damaging and worse for democracy than a congressman embracing white supremacy. And you can tell because of the amount of coverage that was provided. The worst one was Fox News, who covered Congressman Tlaib cursing 71 times more than they covered Steve King. And now their coverage of Steve King was 51 seconds in passing when they framed the issue as him fighting back to the New York Times, not even caring to explain the kind of damage that white supremacy does to very real people and communities out there.
And what is interesting that, first of all, that's Fox News, but the other networks, now NBC Nightly News dedicated a segment to it, but when you look at the other networks, they also pretty much ignored it. I think your analysis also showed that CNN didn't touch it until after 9:30 p.m.
It was equally as bad. It wasn't after 9:30 p.m., and when they did touch it, it was about 14 minutes. That is not a lot when you consider something that should have been front page, and people need to be aware of the extremism that is now, you know, within our democracy, in our elected power, and the extremism that is fueling policies. Most of these are anti-immigrant policies, so now you know that they come from a place of white supremacy. Here's the thing, though. This is not the first time that Congressman King has made very clear that he believes and ascribes to the kind of tenets of white supremacy. Last year, actually, Media Matters reported that in an interview with a local Iowa TV station, he said a version of the same thing. And if you'll let me quote, this was an interview in which he was defending his decision to endorse Faith Goldy, a white supremacist who ran for office in Canada and thankfully lost by a landslide. But this was October 21st, last fall, when he was campaigning to be reelected for the 9th time. And he legitimately said a version of what you heard him say to the New York Times. He said that white nationalist has become now a derogatory term today I wouldn't have thought so maybe a year or 2 or 3 ago. So now when you hear him on the floor acting shocked that this would be published on the New York Times, the reason he's acting shocked is because for the first time, his comments actually drew some sort of backlash. Definitely not from national media because of the scant coverage that you've seen, as we've talked about, but definitely some sort of coverage that he felt compelled, at least from some people in Congress, that he felt compelled to come out and explain himself and offered a non-apology. But he said the same words to a local Iowa station. The difference was that there was no one blinked an eye, and there was not a real consequence from the part of the Republican Party, and no real coverage from any news media. One of the outlets that has been very thorough and has been consistently, calling things by their name. White supremacy is white supremacy, and therefore, if you embrace white supremacy, you are a white supremacist. The Huffington Post has consistently been calling Representative Steve King white supremacist because of the things that he has embraced, both in policy and in commentary, and because of the endorsements that he's made and the people that he retweets and the media that he appears on while he's abroad. He went on white supremacist media when he went to Austria. So these are the things that we've seen that he's done without really hiding. And the issue is that until now, media has grappled with how to cover and whether to say the name, but you have to call things what they are if you are to inform your audiences. And if you embrace white supremacy, you are a white supremacist.
But you also have the issue of how mainstream media frames these things. So, for instance, NBC Nightly News, even though they covered it in a segment and they covered those statements, they also released a tweet, and I'm trying to pull it up, where they sort of framed it as controversial comments by Steve King. And it was like, okay, really? And so it's amazing how these mainstream media outlets want to dance around exactly what an issue is and afraid to call it what it is.
And you wonder whether white people get away with being extremists and because media give them a pass, while people of color like Representative Tlaib cannot even curse without getting wide coverage and wall-to-wall mentions on the media and condemnation. So it's kind of double standard that in which white men, even those who embrace extremism and very dangerous ideologies, deadly ideologies like white supremacy, kind of get away with it with a very favorable framing. Even when they say the words themselves, media will resist the framing and will say, well, that was racially controversial, when actually it's not controversial. It has a name, and it's called white supremacy. And this is the issue. It's been happening for a while out in the open. You can see it in his Twitter feed. If you remember in March in 2017, when he tweeted out that the U.S. cannot renew its civilization with someone else's babies, that was a very veiled dog whistle calling out and kind of it reminds you of that false narrative that white supremacists pull, that there is a sort of white genocide going on and that no one's doing anything about it, and that multiculturalism necessarily is opposed to whiteness. And so with those words, he was kind of reminding people of those veiled threats of white supremacy and definitely sounding a dog whistle. That was not lost. White supremacists responded to that and celebrated it. Just last year, as he was coming under fire for retweeting white supremacists and for endorsing a Nazi, we went to see what white supremacists on the media were saying about him, and he was widely celebrated and embraced as one of their own. So if you're not going to believe him at his words, at least you have to believe the people who outwardly say that are white supremacists. And when they say that they embrace this representative as one of their own, there's a reason for that.
All right, then. Christine Lopez, I certainly appreciate it. Thank you so very much.
My pleasure to be here.
All right, folks. Again, and I want to show you guys, I'm pulling it right now, I want to show you the tweet. This is from NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt. And this was the tweet that they sent out last night. Here we go to my iPad. Now on NBC Nightly News, Casey speaks with GOP Rep Steve King about his controversial comments in a New York Times interview, which some people are calling racist. That's how they framed it. Now, as Christina said, today, Steve King went to the floor of the House to explain his thoughts about the New York Times interview, and he's going to get the Kanye treatment. We shall deconstruct what he's about to say. Press play.
I come to the floor here at the United States House of Representatives with a specific purpose today, and that's to address an issue that's become a controversy. I regret that. I made a freshman mistake a week ago today when I took a call from a reporter from the New York Times, and that was a 56-minute interview without a tape. That resulted in a long article. In that article were snippets of the 56-minute interview. Part of that inquiry was about the history of the immigration policy in this country for over the last, say, 18 or so years, of which I have been a significant part, especially in Iowa, as we have a voice to shape policy and help these presidential candidates move on to the Oval Office. I'm grateful that much of the policy that was debated then is in the Oval Office today, and it's being debated all over this country. But one phrase in that long article has created an unnecessary controversy. That was my mistake, Mr. Speaker. And so I want to start this out with some context to that discussion, and that is this, that if you can control the language, you can control the policy. Labels have been hurled in this country at people like we have never seen in this history of America. I made a point on this in a September 12th tweet that I sent out as a component of this broader dialogue. And here is the tweet, verbatim, Mr. Speaker. The word Nazi is injected into leftist talking points because the worn-out, exhausted word racist is overused and applied to nearly everyone.
Stop.
That's the...
So, Steve King, you talked about labels. You're right. How about these labels? Nigger. How about coon? How about lazy, inferior, not smart? I remember all of those labels, many of them used by founding fathers, the people who you love to celebrate, about people who look like me. Continue.
Is overused and applied to nearly everyone. That's the foundation for that discussion with, at least part of that discussion with the New York Times reporter, Mr. Speaker. And in that also was discussion of other terms that had been used, almost always unjustly labeling otherwise innocent people. The word racist, the word Nazi, the word fascist, the phrase white nationalist, the phrase white supremacist. They even are derogatory towards Western civilization, which is the foundation for the American civilization, and we're today the flagship. So at this point, I'll read the quote that have brought about this controversy, Mr. Speaker, and this is from the New York Times article titled, Before Trump, Steve King set the agenda for the wall and anti-immigrant politics, which, by the way, is a bit pejorative because I've never been anti-immigrant. I have been anti-illegal immigrant, and I remain that way. But here's the quote. It says, quote, white nationalist, white supremacist, and this is from me, by the way, Mr. Speaker, white nationalist, white supremacist, Western civilization, how did that language become offensive? Mr. King said, why did I sit in classes teaching me about the merits of our history and our civilization? That's off of this article, and that's the substance of this heartburn that seems to be churning across the media in America today. And so I look at that and I think, well, what was that conversation? It was about how those words got plugged into our dialogue, not when the words became offensive, which is what the technical interpretation of this is. How did that language become offensive? It's how did that offensive language get injected into our political dialogue? Who does that? How does it get done? How do they get by with laying labels like this on people? And when I ask the question, why did I sit in classes teaching me about the merits of our history and our civilization? That response was strictly for, why did I sit in Western civilization classes to hear about the merits of our history? I've never sat in a class at any time and heard any merits about any of those other names, including I've never heard a merit about racist. I never heard a merit about Nazi or fascist or white nationalist or white supremacist.
Stop. Okay, Steve. A good reason you probably likely haven't heard those phrases in a classroom is because America, largely white America, has been in engrossed denial about the history of this country. I guess you're in complete denial by the fact that when Bill O'Reilly went on Fox News and said that in the American Revolution they were fighting for the freedom of black people when slavery was still in place after the American Revolution. I guess you are not confused because American classrooms have always ignored this. We have textbooks right now where they want to label slavery actually as indentured servants, which we know is simply not the case. We also know that there are classrooms today, especially in places like Tennessee and Texas, where they'll try to somehow soften the blow of bigotry by saying, no, it really wasn't that bad, slavery. It was just slightly inconvenient. See, Steve, the reason you haven't heard those things is because you went to school with his story as opposed to history. That's why you are a 69-year-old white man who is in denial about the true history of America. Continue.
But Western civilization has merit, and I remain a defender. So, Mr. Speaker,
How much
I
left?
regret the heartburn that has poured forth upon this Congress and this country, and especially in my state and in my congressional district. But the people who know me know I wouldn't have to even make this statement because they do know me. They know my life, they know my history, they know that I have lived in the same place since 1978. There's nothing about my family or my history or my neighborhood or that would suggest that these false allegations could be supported by any activity whatsoever.
Stop.
I reject that idea.
If we actually go back, how many black people live in Iowa? What's the percentage, Steve? How many Latinos live in Iowa? I remember a guy, Tim Madigan, was writer with the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, who I work with, who wrote the book on the burning about the Tulsa race riot that took place. And he said that for all those years, he never understood why black people in America were so upset when O.J. happened, when other major stories happening. But it wasn't until doing the research for the book, The Burning, when he began to read the stories of elderly black people who were kneeling in their homes praying, and you had angry white racists who stormed in, put guns to the back of their heads and blew their brains out. He said, for the first time as a white man who did not meet anybody black until he went to college, Steve, he grew up in Iowa. He said, now I understand why black people are often so angry and upset with American history. So, Steve, when you say, oh, I've lived in the same place since 1978, that doesn't actually help your cause. It actually helps ours because it explains your point of view and your viewpoint and where you grew up and your perspective. Continue.
Reject that ideology. I defend American civilization, which is an essential component of Western civilization.
Ain't that grand? So, folks, what you have here is an effort by Steve King to somehow continue to explain away exactly his comments, and hopefully this is going to save his behind. But as you heard earlier on the show, you have Congressman Tim Ryan, who's trying to get other Republicans to stand with him to censure Steve King. Joining us right now, Dr. Greg Carr, Chair, Department of Afro-American Studies, Howard University. We also have Joseph Williams, Senior Editor, U.S. News and World Report, as well as we also have Corey Whalen, who joins us right now. She's a writer and consultant. So I would throw out to all three of you. Anybody can jump in. And so he tries to go to the House to redefine the actual interview. But the issue we have here is we have a long record and a vast body of work of comments from Steve King that where it's not just this singular interview, the fact that he endorsed a white nationalist in Canada where he has no leverage whatsoever, where he is aligned with and endorsed white nationalists in Europe. Crocodile tears ain't gonna work, Steve.
Yeah, I've worked on Capitol Hill, so I was just going to say where there's smoke, there's fire on this, and it's not as though we can really take...
This is a raging inferno.
Okay, yeah, that's actually more accurate. But the point is that we can't really take Representative King in good faith when he comes on the floor saying these things because, as you've pointed out, he has a history. This wasn't one misstep in an unrecorded interview, which, by the way, I'm sorry, I was a communications director on Capitol Hill. Who speaks for an hour to, the New York Times with no recording whatsoever? If this were true, he should be able to prove it, but I don't really believe him, honestly.
Well, it's not. It's absolutely true, because the one thing that he said on the floor, one thing he did not say on the floor was, I was misquoted, I was taken out of context. No, he absolutely was quoted and taken in context, which is part of his problem. Now, one of the things that occurred to me is that you mentioned that he was reelected 9 times from the state of Iowa, which has the nation's first primary. Everybody's rushing to get to Iowa. This is something that's always puzzled me, why the percentages of population in Iowa does not necessarily reflect the demographics of the nation, yet it's our first primary, and you have representatives like Steve King. He was one of many, though. I mean, you have Louis Gohmert has been really kind of out there being kind of offensive, and Steve King just kind of got caught and is trying to walk it back, but I don't think it's going to work this time.
You know, Roland, it's interesting, and I don't think it's coincidental that the other stream media has begun to check up a little momentum in the wake of last night's show. I think what you did when you set him on fire last night, I think they said, well, we have to do something. The GOP has a Steve King problem, in part because their policies reflect this ideological thrust. So what you see now is Jeb Bush is on social media, everybody, we got to get rid of Steve. And what they're saying is, can we primary him? Can we put up a GOP alternative? What they're trying to do is shrink this tumor down to talk about white supremacy and could define it as Klansmen and Nazis, yes, and therefore ignore, and, Senator Scott did what he could in South Carolina, but you see what he did. I don't know why Western civilization would be offensive. Then he drops in the false equivalency with Minister Farrakhan. And in other words, can we just say, if you talk like a racist, if you go out there and are overt, we can somehow say that's what we mean and ignore the policy implications. When you have Trump on the border in your home state of Texas talking about there's a national emergency, what he's saying is the national emergency is anti-Western civilization, anti-white. The biggest Steve we have a problem with now isn't Steve King. It's Stephen Miller, the guy who probably wrote the speech that Trump gave. They're worried about if they can throw Steve King overboard and then continue to hide, they can then remove the hoods off the rest of their heads. They're trying to localize.
Let me unpack what you said. Go to my iPad, Henry. This is Jeb Bush. It's not enough to condemn Steve King's unconscionable racist remarks. Republican leaders must actively support a worthy primary opponent to defeat King because he won't have the decency to resign. This is what George P. Bush, his nephew, said. The racist comments of Congressman Steve King in Washington and party activist Ray Myers in Texas have no place in our country and no place in our party. The GOP must value all human beings at all stages of life. Let us be the party of Lincoln and Reagan, not of Steve King and Ray Myers. And what he's talking about is Ray Myers, who posted something, what they need is a rope and a tree. And that's in regards to the elections administrator there in Florida. Now, remember, also today, folks, also what happened in Tarrant County, there was a vote there to remove a Muslim from being a leader of the Tarrant County Republican Party. It was defeated, I believe, 149 to 49, which means that 49 folks said absolutely remove him. Now, strong Republican in good standing, but they didn't like the fact that he was a Muslim. That's the Republican Party. And what you have here is, now to Greg's point, we've showed you the National Review, their editorial talking about primary. Okay, let me explain to all of you. He just got reelected. He was just sworn in last week. So what they're focused on, they're trying to say, we should primary him. Y'all, that primary is not until November 2020. That means, for them, Steve King, an avowed white supremacist Republican from Iowa, will continue to serve in Congress for the next 2 years. So this little game of this three-card trick game, no. I'm not playing the game. The reality is the Republicans have allowed this white supremacist to stand in their party, to sit on committees, to be a crucial vote on various issues because they also believe in what he says. The problem is that he said it publicly. And that's the problem. That's why you have Senator Tim Scott, who's coming out, strongest he's done in quite some time, making these comments because they understand that this is their party. And this is why black folks feel the way they feel and Latinos feel the way they feel, because of people like Steve King. And he wants to only focus on that part, but he wants to ignore the last line when he basically said the Democratic Party is not a place for white men. As if white men have had trouble in America for all of these years.
Oh, but when he said it's no country for old men, that's a gesture to the movie. Remember, Tommy Lee Jones was the sheriff in the movie No Country for Old Men when the Latino guy, Xavier Bardem, whoever it was murdering everybody. So that was a very specific phrase. He said, I looked over the aisle and I said, it's no country for old men. That's a gesture to old white men.
Precisely.
Like Tommy Lee, that's exactly right.
That's exactly what it is. All right, folks, we're going to take a break right now. When we come back, we're going to talk about the Trump shutdown, now in its 21st day with Congress out of town. This will be the longest federal government shutdown in history. What is the impact on public housing? We'll break it down next. Roland Martin Unfiltered.
Hey everybody, this is Sherry Shepherd. You're watching Roland Martin Unfiltered, and while he's doing Unfiltered, I'm practicing the wobble. Yes, I am. Because Roland Martin's the one, he will do it backwards, he will do it on the side. He messes everybody up when he gets into the wobble, because he doesn't know how to do it, so he does it backwards. And it messes me up every single time. So I'm working on it. I got it. You got Roland Martin.
Hi, my name is LaToya Luckett, and you're watching Roland Martin Unfiltered.
What's going on, everybody? It's your boy, Mac Wiles, and you are watching Roland Martin Unfiltered.
What's up, y'all? It's Ryan Destiny, and you're watching Roland Martin Unfiltered.
What up, Lana Well, and you are watching Roland Martin Unfiltered.
All right, folks, federal government shutdown, 21st day. Trump still holding America hostage for his wall. You have Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, who is saying the Democrats won't do anything. So, Mr. President, declare a national emergency. No, the real national emergency are the people who are being screwed. Now, the focus is on the 800,000 federal workers who aren't getting paid. The problem with a federal government shutdown is that other people, millions of other people, are being impacted, including those who live in public housing or subsidized housing. Joining us right now is Adrienne Todman. She's the CEO of the National Organization of Housing and Redevelopment Officials. Glad to have you here. How are folks impacted beyond the workers? How serious is this?
Yeah, and thank you for asking the question. So in the housing industry, we are terrified about what's happening inside of public housing and subsidized housing. So what do we know about public housing right now? That they have funds for January. We've been told they have funds for February, but after that, the program falls off a cliff. And there's no funding at all to fix toilets, to fix the heat during the winter, to fix air conditioning systems. There's no funding there. But what's even worse than what's happening in public housing right now is the affordable housing that's provided by some of our private partners. Just last week, 1,100 contracts, which represents roughly 80,000 people, low-income seniors and people with disabilities across the country, were not renewed in December. So what does that mean for an owner? It means that the funds that they use from HUD to be a landlord, to make the kind of repairs, the kind of health and safety issues that these seniors and persons with disabilities need, may not get done. That number will increase as this shutdown goes on. We know that in January, another 500 contracts may not be renewed. In February, it's the same, and that represents about 30 to 40,000 additional low-income people. So this is a tragedy, and it needs to stop.
And we talk about residents. I mean, the issue they then have is, what do they do?
That's right. So residents right now, when I'm talking to some of my members at NARA, we represent about 20,000 people who house families across the country. Residents are concerned that they're going to be evicted. If their landlords are not getting the rent that they're supposed to get from the federal government and HUD, they're concerned, well, what does it mean? If my rent is not being paid, am I going to be evicted? So our members are busy consoling low-income families who have enough stress on their lives on you're not going to find yourself homeless because of this shutdown. But what it means for owners is they now have to go into their reserves, which is a process that has to be handheld through HUD. So HUD woke up about this a couple days ago, and they are now bringing in unpaid staff, mind you, unpaid staff to try to process, to allow owners to go into their reserves so this can be abated.
What would you like for our audience to do to help in this situation?
I think we've got to pick up your phone, call your congressman, call your congresswoman, call the White House, and says the craziness needs to end now.
All right, Adrienne Topman, we appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All right, folks, an update on the story out of Los Angeles dealing with Democratic donor Ed Buck, a second black man found dead in his apartment in 18 months. Of course, we've been covering this story. The man who was found dead was Timothy Dean. He's 55 years old. He worked at Saks Fifth Avenue in Beverly Hills. Now, investigators are looking into this second death under 18 months in Buck's home. Earlier today, I sat down with Dr. Cleo Monago, who works with, actually the founder of Black Men's Exchange, a same-gender loving organization. And he said, look, this is very familiar with what happens in Los Angeles between white men and black men who are gay. So, Cleo, all of a sudden, national media is now paying attention to the Ed Buck story. We were focused on it 18 months ago, and you spent a lot of time in Los Angeles. Just talk about just is this the norm? How crazy this is? Just your thoughts about this.
Well, first of all, I think you may know by now that there's a third gentleman who survived Ed Buck and got away, brother named Jermaine Gatson, I think his name was, who Ed Buck had shipped in from Minnesota, who actually has pictures of him being involved with this man in the drug paraphernalia. The reason I raised that is because the attorney for Buck said something about his excuse was that, well, I have people in my life, some of them do drugs, and they come to my home when they have problems. And what's going on is he's creating a new narrative, so what happened the first time, which meant nothing in response to a death, is going to happen again. And I hope people are real clear about the contradictions here because, first of all, people who are just your friends don't typically come to the house at 1 o'clock a.m. for anything. And the first man, Jamel, was found nude and dead in his home. So I really want to make it real clear that there's disregard for these black men's lives going on, and this white man is preparing himself to get away with it again, and that there's a predatory problem in the white gay community of fetishizing and being predators on black men, which has been going since I was a kid. There's major intersections in this country where working class, unemployed men, and some of these men have been to prison and have learned to have engagements with other men based on the prison experience, who can't get a job, who need a fix, who are subject to people like Buck. My biggest concern is that he doesn't get away with it, and that the tendency to disregard black life as if a person dies, it doesn't matter. And I want to reiterate that, again, people, that this man was at home. There's young people who have been involved with him who have said he's injected drugs in them, and that he is not an innocent bystander. He is part of a situation that's led to the death of a number of black men or the drug addiction of a number of black men, and that needs to be addressed.
And what was very interesting is that a lot of people have been highly critical of the Los Angeles LGBT Center for their statement. They issued a statement. They said, while much is still to be learned, it appears this tragedy is linked to substance use. And then LGBT people and other marginalized groups are at elevated risk for impacts that result from the current epidemic uses of opioids, methamphetamine, and other dangerous drugs. And that was one of the things that, and some have taken offense to that by saying, wait a minute, don't try to turn this thing all of a sudden into a substance abuse issue.
I agree. The people died in his home. He didn't die in his home. He clearly takes meth as well. So to make it a drug addiction issue, again, is to divert from the fact that this man has a pattern of alluring black men, flying them in. He flew Jermaine, whatever his last, Gatson, I think his name is, from Minneapolis. And I'm here to tell you, this is conjecture, but I imagine that this man has many men who he's done this with. One of the problems in the black community is a lot of same-gender loving people don't feel safe or comfortable or like they can live their lives without some kind of combat or challenge, so they don't say what goes on with them. It's kind of like the child that's been abused in the home who feels like they can't tell anybody because they might be victimized for even saying anything. There's a lot of same-gender loving bisexual black men and black men who are involved in survival sex, who are not necessarily homosexual, but are involved in survival sex, if you know what I mean, who have been...
Now, for the person at home, what's survival sex?
Survival sex is someone who's broke or dealing with a major addiction where they want to get their fix one way or the other. So they'll do anything to get it.
Got it.
And people like Buck and others prey on these kind of people and look for them because they see them as vulnerable and people who are willing to do whatever they want them to do.
Now you have Congressman Ted Lieu of California, who is returning the $18,500 that came from Ed Buck. Jasmine Koenig and others have been really pushing hard, saying, look, return this guy's money. And many Democrats were ignoring that call.
Yeah, well, I'm glad Jasmine's doing what she's doing, but I'm going to go back to things you've heard me say before. These people are involved in CYA activity because of exposure. As you mentioned earlier, you've been covering this issue when the first brother,
from day one.
the first known brother, because I think there were others.
Right.
But you've been covering this for over almost 2 years. When the first time it happens, no one said anything. The mainstream media didn't say anything. Now they're giving money and all this other kind of stuff in terms of making it look like they don't buy into this because they don't want to look bad. But the bottom line is that if it wasn't for public pressure, including the work that you've done and Jasmine as well, these brothers would have been dead and buried, and we would have went on with our lives. But the black community needs to look at the fact that we have black people who are same-gender loving, bisexual, etc., who are vulnerable to these things, who are at risk because, for far as they're concerned, they don't have a community to back them.
Right.
And that they don't have their own people to back them also puts them at risk for Ed Buck. So I want to take take the issue off of Ed in terms of it being all his circumstance he didn't create. He's just opportunizing of a circumstance that black people will not attend to.
All right. Cleveland Nago, I appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Sure.
I want to go real quick to our panel here. I mean, this is, again, without public pressure, this doesn't happen. And otherwise, these black men, their deaths would be absolutely ignored.
They're disposable. I mean, clearly, that's what's going on here. And you have a wealthy white donor. Granted, he's donating to the left, but a wealthy white donor who is able to get away with this, at least as far as we were able to discern, 2 deaths, 2 unexplained deaths, high-profile deaths in his home, and no police investigation, no major calls for action. It's just another example of how black men are seen as disposable, and how white privilege, especially if it's got money backing it, is very, very powerful and can make these guys almost like they didn't exist. They just kind of vanish and disappear.
Ain't natural for 2 people to die in your house in 18 months.
Clearly, and that alone would warrant any kind of investigation from almost any. If I had somebody die in our home, not once, even once would have been enough to warrant a significant investigation. Twice, and nobody really raises an eyebrow, and he's allowed to explain that this really had nothing to do with me. These guys were hooked on drugs. I don't know what happened. Doesn't hold water.
Well, Joe, like you said, I mean, wealth, privilege. There's a level beyond which most of us are not allowed to question or interrogate. This has become an issue now, as Cleo said, Dr. Monaco said, because, you know, it's been pushed out of this venue and others. But at the end of the day, what happens when you have so much money and so much privilege, you can do whatever you want, whether it be Donald Trump, whether it be Buck, whether it be, you name it, Kavanaugh and parties and underage girls. If you've got the connections and the privilege and the wealth, this country sends the message that, you know, the rules don't apply to you the same.
Well, other people don't matter.
That's right.
The money certainly has a lot to do with it, especially when it's given to in a political context. Yes. It kind of reminds me also of the case with Jeffrey Epstein, too, in Florida. Mm-hmm. And that involved young white women, but it was a similar situation of marginalized people being taken advantage of, and someone with political connections and money just completely treating them as though they have no agency.
And got a sweetheart deal from the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Yeah, well, let's hope that in this case it's actually the person is held accountable, Buck, because we don't want to see anything like
all right, folks, let's talk about this story here. Fraser B. Baker was the first black postmaster in Lake City, South Carolina. In 1898, he was lynched after refusing to resign. Fast forward to this year. Congressman Jim Clyburn introduced the bill to rename the office in honor of Baker. Now, the state's entire congressional delegation supported it, and Donald Trump signed it into law last month. And Greg, these things happen all the time where, a post office is named after someone. But for folks who don't know, it's a very interesting history here.
Brother, when you said you were going to cover this story, I was elated. This was perhaps the biggest story in black America at the time that it happened. This happened a couple of months after the Maine, USS Maine, had been destroyed, which kind of triggered the Cuban-Spanish-American War. And at the time, Ida B. Wells led out in this. She sent 2 letters to the Department of Justice. She led a delegation to the White House, met with President McKinley, and then stayed for a month after to lobby, among others, the last congressman of African descent in the United States Congress, and a man you talk about all the time, George White. George White tried to get legislation passed to pay for Baker's family, who had to leave that town in South Carolina because in Lake City, South Carolina, what happened was this man who had been a farmer, was in the Colored Farmers Alliance, had been appointed to postmaster in that little city. And white folks were angry. They sent letters to the United States Postal Service saying, this man isn't delivering our mail. This is after they burnt down the post office. After they burnt the post office down, he moved the post office to his house. At that point, they set a fire. When he's trying to get out with his family, they kill him in the doorway, blow his hole through his head, shoot his wife through the arm. She drops her infant child, who is dead before she hits the ground. They killed the baby, shot her, shot two of her daughters, shot her son. They find the burned bodies of Baker and his young daughter in the ashes, and the federal government, this is the first lynching, the first anti-black violence that is prosecuted by the Department of Justice after Reconstruction. They can't get a conviction. Eventually, she moves to Boston. The rest of her children either die of disease in Boston or has an accident. She comes back, she dies in 1947, but Ida Wells fought this all the way. In fact, finally, she said, in the black community, remember Frazier Baker needs to be our motto while y'all screaming about remember the Maine. So this right here, this is major, brother, that they would even name this for this brother, because he gave his life just trying to be an American.
And being American in service, right?
In service.
I mean, they burned down the post office because they were upset they had a black postmaster.
That's right.
He takes and moves it to his house.
To his house.
To do his duty,
do
right?
his duty.
And it also reminds me of, like, it's almost the flip side of the Confederate statue issue, where you have somebody who was almost forgotten to the midst of history, who should actually have been honored for what he did and for the personal sacrifice that he made in service to his country. And I mean, that's just remarkable.
This, of course, the kind of history Steve King didn't learn about.
Well, you know, I was just thinking that, and I have to say, it's the kind of history that I feel like, as a white person, I can say most of us don't learn about. Of course, you know, I grew up in Massachusetts. I went to a public school. We're taught about slavery, et cetera. But this story, I'd never heard this before. And it's amazing to me that I've never heard this before. It's an incredible story, and I'm glad he's being honored.
Oh, no, quite. You know, and it's interesting, you say you grew up in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Lavinia Baker, his wife, as I said, it was a white woman who said, if the government's not going to pay, please come to Boston. She moved her whole family to Boston, Massachusetts. So she, at least in Massachusetts public schools, the only thing I'd say is that black women like Ida B. Wells aren't the only ones who kept this story going. Shout out to Dr. Trachita Chestnut, who is the National Archives. She wrote a great article on this. Anybody want to read it, you know, I'm sure, you know, they can go through YouTube or you post the link. These sisters have kept this story alive.
Also, in terms of clearing up history, today in Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis and 3 members of his cabinet granted a posthumous pardon to 4 black men who were accused of raping a white woman in 1949. The case was known as the Groveland Four. And it's been documented. One of the 4 was killed before he could be charged, and the other 3 were convicted on, well, less than ideal circumstances. That was a very dramatic hour-long meeting today before that took place. This is a video from the Tallahassee Democrat where family members talked about that meeting and how important it is to get that pardon. All right, not sure why we're not. Oh, here we go.
During the years when he was in prison, the people that talk about you, how it tears apart a family and how everything that goes on with it. But to get to this point, and the one thing that I'm proud of my dad lost my oldest brother when he was 15. That tore him apart.
How do you feel about what the Paget family had to say?
I think I'm not, her sons, I'm like my dad, I have no remorse for them. I believe that something happened, but I don't believe that it's the 4 guys that she said did this to her. My dad, when the police got the call about her being raped, my father first was at the train station, which is 70 miles away, and he was already in the Groveland jail when they got there. He was not even at the scene nor at the site when the whole incident occurred. She merely came down and said, yeah, all of them did it. And at that time, that's all it took. And unfortunately, this case speaks to a greater volume of what happens when people who are in power use that power in an irresponsible manner, and to the place to where people who are in power, they use it for their own gains, because this was more than just a crooked sheriff that did this. This had implications about people who were making money off the citrus farms down here. This is what all this was about. And you had a sheriff who felt like he could do no wrong. He felt like he was king.
All right, then. Again, that was Tallahassee Democrat that actually had that video. Greg, go ahead.
No, I just mentioned our frat brother. I mean, you got to shout out to Alpha. Thurgood Marshall. That's the book Devil in a Grove. If you've ever seen that book, and that's one of the books, the many books you talk about, that was one of the early NAACP cases Marshall took.
Well, again, this is also why it's important for us to right the wrongs of the past, but also from a media standpoint, to also put these stories out there so folks can actually know. Here's something involving one of the folks you saw in the Surviving R. Kelly documentary. TV host and journalist Teray has been accused of sexual harassment by a makeup artist. She says that working with him on a show in 2017, he made extremely lewd comments to her. When she called HR, he was called in and was fired. She says she came forward now because she saw him on the Surviving R. Kelly documentary, as well as for his part. Teray has not denied this happened. In fact, he apologized and said he should not have engaged in such behavior. And so covering that case. All right, folks, so a couple other things that we've been focused on, and that is the issue of Democracy for America, political action committees, and fundraising. Well, there's a Democracy for America was born out, of course, the Howard Dean campaign 2004, and now they had their first president, who's African-American and a woman. And so we're about to play the interview that I did with her. In addition, we're also going to focus on Virginia State University, where he talked about the issue of urban agriculture. And so we're going to play those before we go. I want to thank our panel before we do. I want to thank everybody for being here. Of course, a great Friday. Hope you'll have a great weekend. And good to see all of you. I haven't seen you in a while, Joe. So glad to have you on the show. Next time, don't wear purple.
I like the purple.
No.
You got him surrounded with black gold, though, right?
The show's hosted by an alpha.
It's a thing.
It's black and old gold. So just want to let him know, because the white woman with the Washington Post catching a lot of heat because when she went to the Kamala Harris event and she said all these women started screeching when Senator Kamala Harris mentioned being an AKA, she had never heard of ski wing, and she's been eviscerated all on social media by not knowing anything about black sororities, and so folks have been talking about that, and so I'm just saying, don't make that mistake. But in her defense, look, she tweeted out. She says, "Look, I deleted it. I did not know. A lot of y'all have educated me, and the reality is, that's what we have to do. Some folks, when you don't know, you don't know." And so it's been talked about all over the place, so it's been pretty wild. Listen to folks talk about it. And so, again, we thank all of you being here. Be sure to have a great weekend. Again, right now, folks, we're going to hear from the sister who is the president of Democracy for America Political Action Committee, what they're doing to elect more progressive candidates. And then we'll hear from the professor at Virginia State University, of course, as he talked about urban agriculture. And don't forget, you can support Roland Martin Unfiltered. We're covering stories and issues nobody else is doing. In fact, we probably spend more time on Steve King than all the other media combined. So we want you to go to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com, join our Bring the Funk fan club to support us. And also, I'm also wearing, this is the Bayo shirt. So, I was going through all my closet. I have all these different T-shirts, which I never wear. I want to let y'all know. I never wear T-shirts. But folks sent me this. So Bayo, of course, Black Alliance for Education Opportunities, of course, strong school choice group founded by Dr. Howard Fuller. So they had black education banners. And so I said, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and wear it because it's absolutely true. And that's also what we do here, educating the folks on the issues that matter to us. So here we go. Let's hear from Democracy for America. I'll see you guys on Monday. All right, let's get into it. First off, so you're the first African-American and first woman.
Yes.
Head of Democracy for America.
That's right.
PAC. So first of all, for the people who don't understand, what is this PAC? How long has it been around, and what are you focused on?
So Democracy for America came out of the Howard Dean campaign for presidency back in 2004. The organization is an electoral organization that focuses on progressive issues, but also black and brown people, whites, and progressives. In the last, and women. And in the last election, you might have saw us very active in like Stacey Abrams' race, Andrew Gillum's race, a lot of the new members of Congress we supported. We've been doing this work for 15 years. We raise money for candidates. We've supported over 1,000 candidates since our founding and put over $60 million in races up and down the ticket across the country.
And so, obviously, when you look at the last election, it wasn't just a matter of Democrats winning the House but also it was the local races. And
Right.
so when we talk about local, do you also focus on city council, county commissioner, school board, state rep, state senate? What's the gamut of races you focus on?
All of it. So we, in my race, actually, when I was in Cincinnati running for mayor, DFA endorsed me. We do a lot in DA races, so we supported Wesley Bell, Rachel Rollins. We do school board races. We do, you name it, council races, all the way up, state legislative races, statewide races, federal races in Congress, all the way up to president.
And one of the things that we're seeing a proliferation of political action committees. And for the longest, it was always big money folks. But now you're really seeing people who, and I would dare say, we saw this expand really after, I would say, after the election of Obama, where a lot of people who never bundled money before saw, oh, this is how this thing is done.
Right. It's a big deal. So DFA has always had that model. $5, $10 donations, grandma with fixed income, all across the country giving $5 at a time. And we give that directly, a lot of it directly to our candidates. So we raise that money for them, and then we raise that money to fund our operations as well. And it's actually the way to go, because we are an organization that believes in organizing. And then you know that behind that is somebody who's also going to volunteer, who's going to get their whole network, their church, whoever, to volunteer and give. And we believe that's the best way to raise money. We are actually encouraging a lot of our candidates, and last year that was a really big deal. Take no corporate PAC money, raise your money a little bit at a time, because that represents real people.
We also are seeing, well, first of all, there were a lot of black women and also black men who said that, frankly, they were not getting the support from traditional Democratic donors.
Right.
And so do you look at that as well to see how certain folks are supporting candidates and saying, you know what, these are the people who really, really need our help?
We do, and oftentimes we are challenging the Democratic Party. In Ayanna Presley's race, for instance, she was running against the Democrat, did not have the support of the party. We went in and raised money and supported her. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was another race that we supported. Stacey Abrams' race, we asked to endorse her right when she decided she wanted to run. We were the first in with Stacey Abrams' race and supported her all the way through. When she was in her recount, the issues with voter suppression in Georgia, our members contributed about $25,000 a day to her legal effort. $5, $10 at a time. So, yeah, we look to support candidates who need us most, and we don't care one way or the other if the Democratic Party is supporting them. We really want to make sure that we're supporting the best candidate. And sometimes the party just gets it wrong. I mean, they got it wrong in my race. They get it wrong sometimes. And so we're right there to fill that gap.
So somebody out there who's watching, they say, you know what, I've been thinking about and I want to run. As someone who is, you're looking for candidates, what are you specifically looking for? And then what advice do you have for them as they are considering making that jump?
So we're a progressive organization. Progressive values matter to us. So that's,
So define that. What's that?
Medicare
What's
for
progressive?
all, health care, free tuition college. We do criminal justice reform work, in money bail, in mass incarceration, opposing police brutality in communities.
A litmus test. Are there any issues where if somebody has that stance, your position is we simply cannot support them?
We don't have that kind of policy, but typically at this point, especially with Medicare for all, I mean, healthcare is such an important and critical issue. We really did draw a pretty solid line about Medicare for all in the last election because we feel like it's an important issue. Frankly, 70% of Americans support it anyway. We're really committed to our criminal justice reform work, and we're looking for criminal justice reformers like Wesley Bell, who, you know, was a huge success for us, and Rachel Rollins in Massachusetts. So those are the issues, but more importantly, we're looking for people who are looking to run people-powered campaigns. You got to have a connection to the community. We want to see you organizing. We want to see you opening offices on the ground. We want to see you working directly with voters. And we're looking for black and brown people who want to run, women and white progressives who want to run.
We've already seen candidates pretty much make it clear they're running for president.
Right.
Elizabeth Warren, Senator Warren has stepped out there, even though she keeps saying she's deciding. Senator Kamala Harris, she's running.
Yes.
Obviously, Senator Bernie Sanders as well. And so when you're, I'm sure you're going to wait to see how the field completely feels out.
Right.
But what do you want to see or hear from when it comes to one of these Democratic candidates that you'll be considering who to back?
So this year, we're really excited, right? I mean, we think there's a real choice here in that we've got more than one progressive running. So we got a lot of progressives running, so that means we can talk about those issues that matter. Above and beyond that, we want to see candidates who are really building a ground game. Like if your policy is to raise a bunch of money and go on TV, that's not our strategy. Expand the electorate. We don't want you trying to turn Republicans into Democrats. You should be looking to engage voters who don't traditionally vote, get them to vote. And honestly, I want them to go deeper and wider in that, right? In Florida, we're doing, we just quote unquote won the fight to engage former felons, returning citizens, engage those individuals and get them to vote. Immigrant populations.
Because that's been one of the issues that I've been raising, that look, you got 1.4 million people.
Right.
The question is, who's going to mobilize those 1.4 million people?
And what I hear on the ground among the Democratic establishment is that they're expecting to get those voters. You cannot expect to get those voters. You got to go work for those voters, right? And we know that the right is already trying to organize those voters, right?
Because first of all,
the
initiative passed obviously significant Democratic support, but it also had Republican support as well.
I know. And so what we've got to do is go work for those votes, right? We got to make sure that we encourage them and talk about the issues that we support, which we think are actually better for former felons and returning citizens, like health care, like housing, like, bridging the gap between rich and poor, like making sure that people have the right to get a job fairly, that their former that their criminal activity does not affect their ability to get a job, right? And so these are all things that we care about, and we're looking for candidates who are going to do that. I also want to make sure I say that we're looking for bold, unapologetic candidates. You see our freshmen, Rashida, Ilhan, Alexandria, Ayanna, you see them, Deb Holland, Johanna Hayes, Lucy McBath, Lauren Underwood, all women who are unapologetic women who are saying, we're here and we're going to change the world. We want to see that at the local level, too. And so if people are really interested and they're serious about it and they think they want to run, whether it's, this is a great local year to run, we are going to be all across the country supporting local races up and down the ticket and at the state level as well. We want people to apply for our endorsement. We do candidate coaching as part of our model, and so we can provide that kind of support. But be prepared to run, and be prepared to run on the issues. Be prepared to organize. Be prepared to fundraise and to be trained if you don't already know on what that means. Have a mission and be committed to it. And like I said, even if we don't think you can win, Alexandria's race was not a foregone conclusion when we got in that race. We were one of the few national organizations that got in that race. We saw her ground game, we saw her passion, we saw that she was a strong advocate, and we got in that race. Same at the local level. We want to see folks who are willing to take a chance. We got to build a bench in this party. The future is not white, the future is brown, and we want to see representation that looks like our country.
All right. Well, if that's Simpson, we appreciate it. Thanks a bunch.
Thank you. Thanks for
good luck.
Me the time.
Thanks a bunch.
It.
All right. So how do we get folks to think big in this world? How do we get them to see the unlimited possibilities, to dream in black? Well, that's what AT&T is doing with HBCU Unlimited, this initiative which focuses on black culture and pride. Now, look, when it comes to HBCUs, we often hear about bands and frats and sororities and other aspects of HBCU life. But we chose to be different this time. We wanted to focus on HBCU professors and the innovative work they're doing to expand the horizons of their students. All right, Dr. Gavinji, so this is your third HBCU. And there are a lot of people who, if you say farming, oh my goodness, they thinking you got to have tons of acres, but it's an increasing number of people who are focused on urban agriculture. So explain what urban agriculture means.
Urban agriculture is any kind of agriculture growing of fruits, vegetables that happens within the city environment.
Okay.
There's nothing different other than the locality. So that's what we call urban agriculture.
And so what we're seeing is obviously with food deserts, but also people who want to grow their own stuff, we're seeing an increase of folks who are doing this, who focus on urban agriculture.
Yes, with the population increasing in the city metropolitan, there's a need to feed those people to address the challenges of food desert. Here we show a demonstration of what you can do with more acreages. What you see on my left side here are called the raised bed gardens. We use intensive way of gardening, put some good soil with rich compost, and it can produce tons and tons of vegetables.
What kind of stuff could somebody grow? You're living in an inner city and you want to create your own urban garden, your own urban farm.
You can grow all kinds of vegetables. As you can see with this demonstration, you can grow kale, collard, mustard green, carrots, onions. It's pretty much anything that you can grow. And as you can see here, this fall crop, winter garden. You can actually come back and grow the summer vegetables. You can grow tomatoes, lettuce, zucchini, and name it.
And so, again, when we think about really what you're talking about, really you have unlimited possibilities in terms of what you want to be able to do.
Yes, sir.
Because in the thought process before was, oh my goodness, I'm living in the city, I'm living in the inner city, I got concrete all around me, there's no way I can do this. But we're now seeing a growing number of people who are focused on this, and a growing number of African Americans who are doing it.
Yeah, yes, sir. Yeah, and again, we mentioned about the food desert. Those are places that people don't have good access to fresh vegetables. So you can actually solve the problem by having backyard gardens, front yard gardens, patio gardens over there.
I'm sure you've had students at some of these HBCUs, and when you said, hey, let's talk about urban agriculture, they said, man, I am not trying to be out there in the fields farming. Yes. And so how have you gotten them to dream bigger, to think bigger, and not have a limited view of agriculture as somehow it's just being on some big wide open farm somewhere on a tractor?
Okay, we want those students to come over here. First of all, learning how to do it is the first step. If you come here and you see actually the possibility that we have here, we are telling them you don't have to have tons of acreage of farm to do gardening, to do farming. You can actually do it in a small acreage situation.
So you fully expect us over the next 5 to 10 years to see a boom of urban agriculture?
Yeah, it's growing, and we also teach a class for students and other people from the community, Sustainable Urban Ag Certificate Program, and the numbers have been growing over years. So they come over here, they do the hands-on, they do some intensive classes, they participate over here. We send them to go work with other gardeners and farmers out there, and the numbers are still growing.
Okay. For more information, go to www.att.com/dream-in-black. You want to check out Roland Martin Unfiltered? YouTube.com/Roland S. Martin. And subscribe to our YouTube channel. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. See that name right there? Roland Martin Unfiltered. Like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's YouTube.com/Roland S. Martin. And don't forget to turn on your notifications so when we go live, you'll know it. Hey fam, want to check out Roland Martin Unfiltered, the blackest show on all of digital, cable, and broadcast. Check out our audio podcast. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. Press play. You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com.